Hi everyone and welcome back to Chess for Charity. In this video, I'm going to show you a very cool checkmate in 2 problem where it is white to move and checkmate in 2. See if you can find the solution to this crazy problem. Look at the rooks and the bishops here. This is just such a weird position. See if you can find the one sequence that leads to a mate in 2. While you're thinking about this, let me quickly encourage you to subscribe if you have not yet already. Half of the income that I earn on this channel goes directly to charity, so every like, every subscriber helps me out so much. Okay, so let's get started here. So you might see this position and say, hey, there is a bishop on the same diagonal as the king, and usually when I see that pattern, I want to move the thing that's in front. So you may have an instinct to just move this rook. Right? For example, you might say rook c7 because that's check, and I'll be able to take your queen. And that would be true, but after bishop takes, this is not mate. I'm looking for mate in 2 here. So this will still be a winning position after something like this. Just check here, and then they're going to have to block, and you can mate them. Right? But that's not mate in 2. Okay, so you kind of quickly realize no matter what you do with this rook, this guy will be hanging. So it doesn't make sense to move this rook. And you say, okay, another move that might come to mind immediately is queen f3. Queen f3 looks nice because you're attacking and you're really cornering the king. But they have this nice little defense of running away. King f5. And in this position, you don't have a nice check that actually wins the game. Of course, you could check them here, but they just run to g5. And you'll win this game for sure. That's not the point. You could even take this pawn, and it's free because they can't take you because it's pinned. But that's not checkmate in 2. Additionally, I should mention you have this move, g4, and they cannot capture en passant because, again, that would be pinned. Oops, like that. But again, they move to g5. So you have to start looking for quiet moves, a move that maybe makes a threat. And this is where I'll give you a hint. If you have a hard time solving this one, I'll give you a hint. The rook on c5 is the thing that's going to move. That's my hint to you. Okay, so let's just maybe examine what I'm talking about. I can take this bishop if I wanted. Let's just use that as a use case. I take the bishop. What does black do? Well, right now, you might think, well, just take me back, right? Well, not exactly, because if they do that, what are they doing? Well, now look at this diagonal. This is kind of scary. This is double check, and that's mate. So remember in the previous line, when I moved the rook, it was never double check. So kind of keep that in mind. That's like a little hint to you. Right? I want to prevent this double checking idea. Okay, so what is the answer? Maybe you can find the motivation for it given those hints. The stunning move here, the only move that results in mate in 2, there's only one move that results in mate in 2, is rook to d5. Bang. Isn't that an insane move? Okay, what is happening? It can be taken by the rook on d4, the rook on e5, the king can take it. What's happening here? What if they don't do anything? What if they take your bishop or the other bishop, or they move the queen, or they take your knight? All these different options. Well, let's look at them. So let's start with just the obvious ones. Let's say the rook on d4 captures. Now what is that doing? Well, it's giving up this diagonal right here, which means I can play the very simple f3, and that's mate, because look at this bishop holding these squares down and the queen holding these squares down. Pretty crazy how such a simple move can win, right? Okay, so the d rook cannot win or cannot capture. What about the e rook? The e rook captures, and what happens? Well, remember what I was mentioning before. This bishop rook tandem can now come into action. Rook e6 check, and they cannot block. That's actually mate, right? This bishop is pinning this rook. Isn't that an amazing resource? Just in slow motion here. Look at the way this is pinned. This bishop is pinning that rook. Cool, okay, so you can't take with the rook. You can't take with that rook. What about the king? If you take with the king, you might be tempted to play here, but remember, they can interpose. That's not what you want to do. Instead, they're walking one step closer into this discovered check. And now, in this case, you can play rook c5, and that is discovered checkmate because the king is one square closer. And you can't take my bishop now because I have two things checking you, not just one. And double check, the king has to move. Okay, so you might ask, what if none of these things happen? What if neither the rook, the other rook, or the king, what if none of them move? What if instead I play a move just to prevent the mate in two? What if I just play queen takes bishop as an example? So let's make the move on board. If I take the bishop, why not? Just to try to avoid the mate in two. Well, this bishop on b6 is supporting this square on d4, and you can play rook takes d4, and that's mate. Okay, so you can't get away with capturing this bishop. And if you make a different move, I'm just going to make a weird move. Just let's say queen h8. The principal threat here is I move this rook to d4 so that, d5, so that I can move it to d4. Bang. That would be checkmate. So now you might see, okay, I get the point. Move it there. I get the point. I'm looking to go here for mate because it's supported by this bishop. So you might ask yourself, what if this bishop just captures the bishop on b6? What's wrong with this? Now this no longer is mate. Rook takes d4 is no longer mate. And now there's more pieces on this diagonal, so I'll never be able to move in one move and give mate. Well, we have another piece. The knight can now hop in, not this one, the one that's being attacked. Knight c3 is mate. Look at that. Because why? This bishop, if we just go back a move, keep your eye on this bishop here. This bishop is looking at c3. That's not c3. Looking at c3. And the second it takes on b6, it relinquishes control of c3. Bang. That is mate. Okay. So the bishop can't move on this diagonal. So what if it does something like it stays on the diagonal? What now? Well, remember, I mentioned a moment ago, the threat is all about d4. Rook takes d4 is mate. Keep that in mind. So you might say, okay, there are so many defenses here, it seems like they can take your knight. What happens there? Well, rook takes d4, right? Like I mentioned, that's the principal threat. So how do you stop rook takes d4? Well, you really can't stop the mate. You can stop rook takes d4 with stuff like this, but it's not going to amount to anything. So after rook d5, there really is no better than to just play your favorite move and lose. And like I said, there you can pick anything. It doesn't really matter. I thought it was interesting looking at other variations, like if I push the pawn, what happens there? Well, queen takes f3, right? All these little variations. There are a lot of moves. There are a lot of possible defenses. I'll leave those to you if you want to investigate them all. I just kind of wanted to show a few good ones. But this is an amazing puzzle, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comments. Please like, subscribe, all that stuff. Tell me where you're watching from. All that stuff is amazing for me. So I appreciate it. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye.